By now, we all know that every crime has multiple victims. When someone is taken away against their will, they leave behind a family with only questions and no closure. This is the reality for James Pitzen, a dad and a husband who has been left alone after the fateful day he lost both his wife, Amy, and his son, Timothy. Almost a decade later, we know exactly what happened to Amy, but Timothy's whereabouts remain a mystery. He could be alive, he could be dead. Today, we'll take a look at the theories surrounding Timothy's disappearance, as well as the moment of hope James had that he thought he could be reunited with his son before it was ripped away from him. Let's dive in. Timothy James Pitzen was born on October 8, 2004 to his parents James Pitzer, who goes by Jim, and Amy Fry Pitzen. He was raised in Aurora, Illinois, and by all accounts, for the most part, his life was a happy one. As he was the only child of his parents, they adored and doted on him 24/7. But not all was perfect in the life of the Pitzer family. For many years, Amy had struggled with severe depression, which she had to take medication for. Some years earlier, she tried to take her own life after an argument with her ex-husband, but thankfully backed out and checked herself into hospital. Amy was married 4 times, but Timothy was her only child. According to Jim, she loved being a mother more than anything, and that was what kept her going on the really bad days. Unfortunately, nothing could distract the couple from the fact that their marriage was struggling. Jim stated that he and Amy argued a lot about money and her tendency to drop everything and go on vacation with her girlfriends. In recent weeks, they'd even talked about getting divorced. So Jim knew that his wife wasn't happy, but with the help of her medication, her depression seemed to be pretty stable. It's fair to say he wouldn't be surprised if they separated, but nothing prepared him for the course of action Amy took to escape her life. On the morning of May 11th, 2011, Jim took Timothy to school as he did on most mornings. As he watched his son head into the main building of Greenman Elementary, he had no idea it would be the last time he would ever see his son. About 30 minutes later, Amy turned up at the school and told the receptionist she needed to sign Timothy out of class for the day. There was a family emergency. Security cameras caught Amy leading Timothy out of the school, holding his hand as he jogged along next to her with his Spider-Man backpack. There wasn't actually any family emergency. It was a trick Amy made up so she could take Timothy out for the day. She and Timothy drove 30 miles to an auto repairs shop, where she left her car and got a ride from one of the employees to Brookfield Zoo, where she and Timothy spent the day together. At 3 p.m., they returned to the shop and picked up the car before moving on to their next destination, Key Lime Cove Water Park. As this was going on, Jim turned up at Timothy's school to pick him up, totally unaware that he hadn't been in school for pretty much the whole day. The staff at the school and Jim were equally confused when they told him Amy said she had taken Timothy home because of a family emergency, which Jim had no clue about. He tried to call Amy again and again, but only got her voicemail. He went home and kept trying, hoping that soon she'd turn into their driveway and have a perfectly reasonable explanation to what was going on, but she never did. The two spent the night at the Water Parks Hotel. Then, the next morning, drove 170 miles to Wisconsin and checked into the Kalari Resort. Amy continued to ignore Jim's calls and didn't contact anybody until the following morning. She called her mom and told her they were both fine and that she just wanted to get away for a few days. Just her and Timothy. She also called her brother-in-law and let Timothy speak to him over the phone, so he knew the boy was safe. He could be heard in the background of both calls anyway, and sounded totally normal and healthy, only mentioning to his mom that he was hungry. This was the last time any of the family would hear from Timothy again. On May 13th, Amy was seen in a few different locations on security cameras, and each time she was alone. She was spotted at a dollar store buying stationery, then at a food store, and finally at Rockford Inn. Somewhere between Wisconsin and returning to Illinois, Timothy had left her side. But we'd never find out what Amy truly did with her son, as the next morning, a maid entered Amy's hotel room to find her dead. She'd taken her own during the night, and the scene was horrifying, with Amy and the bed totally covered in blood. When the police arrived, they identified Amy by a note she left, identifying herself. She also sent separate notes to her mom and a friend. In the note found at the hotel, she said that she was tired of pretending to be okay, and even though having Timothy made life easier, it just wasn't enough for her to keep going. She also said that Timothy was safe and with people who love him. In another, she said that nobody would ever find him. Immediately, the authorities were concerned. Timothy hadn't been handed over to any family members, and Amy didn't have any of his his belongings with her. Even his car seat and toothbrush were gone. Jim was totally heartbroken when he heard the news. He knew he and Amy were having problems, but he always thought they'd be able to work it out and be a happy family again. Now his wife was gone and his son was missing. The authorities went along with the belief that Timothy had been given to people who were caring for him, and they tried to trace Amy's movements as best they could to figure out where she'd left her son. It was rumored that she'd left them with the local Amish community. Since the Amish traditionally live without electricity, TV, and radio, it would have been difficult for them to learn that Timothy was in fact a missing child. Why Amy would have left him with that community is unknown, but she had been seen visiting the area a few times before she died. Since the Amish are so separate from the rest of society, maybe she thought Timothy would be happier growing up in a simpler world. The other theory, of course, was that Timothy wasn't alive at all, and Amy lied in her note to spare her family any more pain. This could explain why she took him on a mini vacation before she passed away. If she intended for him to die too, maybe she wanted his last days on Earth to be filled with fun and love. But if she loved him, why would she end his life too? It's been speculated that Amy may have come to this decision due to her mental well-being. Often, when a parent takes their child, it's because their mental illness is so strong that it convinces them that the world is too awful for their kids to live in it. There has been some evidence to suggest this in this case. When Amy's car was discovered, it was pretty dirty and there were traces of blood in the back seat, like a lot of blood. The Pitzen family did have an explanation for this. Timothy was prone to nosebleeds and had a pretty big one in the car a few weeks before he vanished. The dirt on the car told a more interesting story. Did you guys know that investigators can tell where you've been just by the soil and dust on your car? After analyzing everything, they got a lot of info about the kind of places Amy was driving before she died. There was long grass and weeds in the undercarriage of the car, which indicated she'd been in a damp area, probably close to water. They also found evidence that she'd driven on a gravel road and the car had been close to oak or birch trees. However, she hadn't stopped in a heavily wooded area. Although this was helpful, this information applied to a lot of the area Amy covered when she took Timothy away. With no sign of him and no one coming forward with information, the case started to go cold. That was until 2019, when a boy came forward claiming to be Timothy. The young man came forward in Newport, Kentucky, and said that he was on the run from his captors, who put him through awful things his entire life. When the news hit that Timothy Pitzen may have been found, the media buzz around the case was uncontainable. The boy was taken to a children's hospital after complaining about stomach pains, where he was interviewed by an investigator. Pretty soon his story started to unravel. Police first became suspicious when, after he came forward, he refused to provide his fingerprints or a DNA swab. He eventually caved and allowed the police to take a sample of his DNA to compare with Jim's. This person was not Timothy Pitzen. After hearing Timothy's story on the news, 24-year-old Brian Michael Reaney decided to fake being Timothy in order to get away from his own troubled family. This wasn't the first time he'd done something like this either. After admitting his true identity, Brian was sentenced to 2 years in prison after he pled guilty to aggravated identity theft. Surprisingly, even though they were hurt by the hoax, the Pitzen family were pretty sympathetic towards Brian, saying it made them sad to think he was having such a bad time that he felt he had to pretend to be someone else. Unfortunately, despite the new attention this brought the case, nothing else has come up to say where the real Timothy is, but Jim remains hopeful that his son is still alive somewhere. He is so confident that he's continued to build a treehouse he was making for Timothy, and hopes one day he'll be able to see it for himself. What do you guys think of this case? Do you think it's possible that Timothy is still out there alive somewhere? Let me know what you think down in the comments below.